and I know this sounds crazy, but I'm just trying to ask kind of the hard questions here. Okay, if I have one pork chop tonight or two pork chops tonight for dinner, am I going to live differently tomorrow? And I think that's the point where I think that's part of where we get into trouble, right? Mm-hmm. We can have the big potluck at church. We can come home, take a Sunday afternoon nap, and go on about our business. And at least in our mind, it doesn't really impact me, especially spiritually. But does it?
Well, I would say yes. I would say yes to that. The question is, what are you running to? Mm-hmm. What are you running to? When you just said that about the second pork chop, what I thought about was the example of Christ and how he, during his time with the disciples, teaching them, training them, mentoring them, pouring his spirit on them, he always taught them to take just what they needed. Not all that they wanted, but just what they needed, because he himself and God were their sustainment, right? That we have this thing inside of us, which I think is Satan's great deception, especially when it comes to food, that it's okay to have a little more. It's just a pork chop. And in some situations, for some people, that may be okay. But for some people, that may be their crutch instead of God himself. Like, instead of leaning on God, instead of running to him, we cope with food. And then there's the chemical, the actual science part of what happens to your body, the compound effect of the extra pork chop over time. Most Americans will gain on average, 10 to 20 pounds a year. Few will lose 10 pounds a year. And so that in and of itself is a reason to kind of take a step back and go, okay, if my weight's higher, I'm not as mobile, I don't feel as good, I don't have as good mental clarity. The science behind the lack of mental clarity in people who are morbidly obese is pretty astounding, that they just don't have the cognitive ability to keep up with people who are not obese. It's just not possible, because their body's trying to do too many other things to take care of itself. So that is also a reason for people of faith, especially, to be able to monitor what's going on, because we need to be fit for the race. And it's not necessarily just about at our jobs or what are our families, but it's, can you sustain the long night? If you've overindulged at dinner and your child comes home from, a high school football game and they've got problems, but you're too tired because you've done stuffed the tank too full, you have nothing left, is what I'm getting at. And I know that's kind of a very practical, basic example. And most people will find it somewhere within them to get it together to feel good. But over time, that compound effect is really, really impactful on their bodies and obviously on their spirituality.
Well, we can't. Here's the thing that we can't separate, right? We are physical beings. We are spiritual beings trapped in this physical body. There's no way to separate the two until we're dead, right? That's the only thing that separates them. And so what's happening in the physical, there's no way that it doesn't impact what's happening in the spiritual. What gets manifested in the physical often is a reflection of what's going on in the spiritual, or the lack of something going on in the spiritual. And so, we could go further than that, but I think the point we want to make is that the two are definitely tied together. I mean, if I'm sleepy because I ate too much pecan pie, I'm probably not going to read my Bible, right? I'm just going to go to bed, right? Or I'm not going to pray. And so I don't think it's like we eat the extra pork chop and the next day we wake up and go do some horrendous sin.
That's right, yeah.
Right? It's the subtle things.
Well, and I think that's why it's Satan's great deception, because it's the creep. It's the small things over time that add up to big pieces in our life that distract us from God's best for us. I've tried to get myself into a habit of thinking about food or consumption or whatever it is with regard to, is this God's best for me, and does it equal long-term God's best for me? And so we can have that debate in our head all day long, the head trash of which is not truth. Like we have to go back to what we know is truth, right? Because
Right.
some things can be true, but
Sure.
not truth.
Right.
And so, is it truth that I need to eat the extra portion, or I need to not move my body? Because that's another huge piece of it. It's not just food, but moving our physical body, like you said. Is it truth that Christ died for me to be gluttonous? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to kind of, for me, that's been helpful to go, okay, I need to, this is my gauge here for the, the spiritual impact meter, if you will, of does this make me better? Does this make me does this bring me closer to God? Does it take me farther away from Him? And am I a better or worse witness because of it?
Yeah, I think, Andrew, feel free to jump in here at any time.
He's processing. I can see the wheels turning.
He's got the wheels turning over there. I think that, what you just said kind of speaks to the fact that God has given us everything that we have to steward, right? And we can talk about a lot of things to steward, but we don't often hear it talked about that our health, our physical well-being, He's also given us to steward. Why? Not for our own. I mean, we do get benefit out of it. And I'll maybe have more to say about that later. But it's so that we can better serve Him, so that we can better impact the kingdom. If our physical body is less than it should be or could be, then we're shortchanging ourselves spiritually if we think that there is an actual connection between the two.
Agreed. Well, I think society has kind of sold us Satan's lie. And they've made a lot of money off of it. In the form of six-pack abs, and you've got to be ripped, and all these things. You have to eat only chicken and broccoli all day long, and all these crazy things. And that's not the truth. The truth is moderation, right? But staying honed into what you just said about our physical body feeling good, being able to move, being mobile. Here's the other piece. We're no longer a hindrance to other people when we are healthy. Like, I don't want my husband to have to take care of me and short his life because I didn't do my part. Like, it is our responsibility to not be a burden on others by making good choices for ourselves. And it's a huge issue, I think, in the church, obviously in American culture, where we believe people are responsible to take care of us, or it's their fault. There's no self-responsibility. And so we have to have some self-responsibility in that. Something, unless you want to add to that, Andrew, I want to...
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, I think that not only our embodiedness as a people is kind of waning with the increased abstraction in the world. So what do I mean by that? We live more of our lives on the internet these days, which is all stuff that happens in between our ears, We live so much of our lives in our brains, and I'm sure that Brandi, you can testify to the kind of deteriorating effect that has on the physical and the mental health when that connection between the two is severed.
The connection between
the abstract mental and the embodied physical. And modern people look at something like ritual, like communion, one that's still observed, thankfully. And they say, well, look how stupid that is. They're eating a little cracker, and they're drinking some grape juice, and they're thinking that they're doing something. And I think the reason for that is they don't understand that it's important to represent abstract spiritual truths in the physical, right? And that's why people need to do that. And as we become less and less embodied creatures, our understanding, and this is true of the world and the church, which I'm sure we'll get to later, of how eating and moving and sleeping and whatever else it is that we're doing impacts us spiritually. So I'll tie this back to what you said at the beginning. What am I going to have for dinner? whatsoever you do all to, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. And you talked about basing the decision on how it makes you feel, you know, and I think that that's where pretty much all of us are at this point. It's just as a baseline, you know, people think differently about food and that kind of thing. But in the mainstream, the question when you're choosing what you're going to eat is, well, which one of them tastes better, you know? Or, you know, if you're going to have some coffee, it's like, am I feeling a one shot or a triple shot today, you know? It's about how it makes us feel. I think the starting point for a Christian is what choice brings the most glory to God. And that's a completely different conversation. So, should I have one pork chop or two pork chops? Which choice is more glorifying to God? I don't even think we know how to think that way.